He discovered a crashed ship in the desert. When it responded to his voice, everything changed. Some said he was chasing ghosts of the past, wandering through the footprints of those who had long disappeared. Others called him reckless, but to Daniel, exploration was life itself. That morning he woke before sunrise, the sky already hinting at the fiery colors of daybreak. The desert stretched before him like a golden sea, each ripple of sand holding secrets untold. With his backpack filled with essentials, water, notebooks, a camera, and his trusty compass, he set off on a path few had traveled in decades. The wind was gentle at first, carrying the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. Daniel's boots sank slightly with each step into the warm sand, and the silence of the desert was almost overwhelming. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the distant mountains seemed to hold their breath. He walked for hours, occasionally stopping to examine strange rock formations or to record notes about patterns in the sand. His mind wandered, as it often did, imagining the lives of traders and travelers who might have crossed this very land centuries ago. It was late morning when something caught Daniel's eye. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, the sun reflecting off a distant rock or a shard of glass buried in the sand. But as he moved closer, the glint became sharper, almost metallic, unlike anything natural. His heartbeat quickened. Curiosity, that ever-present companion, took over. He quickened his pace, brushing against the dry shrubs, careful not to lose sight of the strange reflection. When he finally reached the spot, Daniel could hardly believe what he saw. Half buried in the sand was a structure unlike any he had ever encountered. It looked like the remains of a ship, but no ship he had ever seen in history books or museums. Its surface was smooth, metallic, and curved in ways that defied conventional design. Strange markings ran along its edges, symbols that didn't match any language he knew. The metal gleamed with a color that shifted slightly in the sunlight, sometimes silver, sometimes gold. Daniel crouched closer, running his fingers gently over the surface, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. He circled the ship, his mind racing with questions. How had it ended up here in the middle of the desert? Why had no one discovered it before? His thoughts drifted to stories of lost civilizations, ancient visitors from faraway lands, and even the fantastical tales of explorers who claimed to have seen things that no one else could explain. Daniel had never believed in the impossible, but here it was before him, undeniable and silent. As he examined the ship, he noticed that the sand around it was disturbed, as if something heavy had been dragged across the dunes. There were no footprints, no obvious signs of life, just a path that led to the wreckage. Daniel realized that the ship must have been here for a long time, slowly sinking into the desert floor, hidden by time and sandstorms. He could almost hear the wind whispering secrets through the dunes, carrying echoes of the past. Taking a step back, he pulled out his notebook and began sketching the outlines, marking every curve, every strange symbol. He photographed the ship from every angle, careful to capture the detail that made it so unusual. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not entirely alone. The desert had always been quiet, but now it seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't name. It was as if the ship itself was aware of his presence, waiting. Hours passed quickly. Daniel lost track of time as he documented every inch of the wreckage. He noticed that some of the markings appeared to change slightly depending on the angle of the sun. They were unlike any alphabet or code he had studied. They were more like patterns, shapes that hinted at intelligence behind them. He wondered if anyone else in the world had ever seen something like this. Was he the first? The thought made his chest tighten with both excitement and fear. As the sun reached its peak, the heat grew intense. Daniel took a long drink of water, leaning against the ship for shade. He noticed small details he had missed before. Tiny vents along the surface, faint scratches that suggested movement, and a faint warmth coming from the metal, almost like it had its own heartbeat. He pressed his hand against it, and a shiver ran through him, not from cold but from awe. Whatever this was, it was not ordinary. In the quiet of the desert, Daniel spoke aloud, almost instinctively. "Hello!" His voice sounded tiny against the vast expanse of sand and sky. He expected nothing, of course, just his own voice bouncing back. But then, for the briefest moment, he thought he heard a response. A faint vibration, like a hum under the metal, as if the ship had acknowledged him. He froze, every nerve on edge. Surely it was just the wind. Yet the feeling lingered, like the desert itself had shifted around him. Daniel spent the rest of the afternoon carefully examining the ship. He noted strange panels that seemed designed to open but remained sealed, as if waiting for someone with the right knowledge. He tried pressing, tapping, and even whispering questions, though he didn't expect an answer. Every instinct in his body told him that this was no ordinary wreck, no mere relic of human engineering. There was something more, something deliberate and intelligent in its design. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep orange and the desert shadows grew long. Daniel finally allowed himself a moment to sit and rest. The ship gleamed faintly in the fading light, silent yet commanding. He felt a strange mix of fear and wonder, the kind that comes only when a person knows they have stumbled onto something that could change everything. He didn't understand it yet, but he knew he had to return, to study it further, and perhaps to find a way to communicate. By the time the stars appeared, Daniel had made a decision. He would camp nearby, close enough to keep watch over the ship but hidden from anyone who might pass through. He lit a small fire at a safe distance and ate his simple dinner in silence, eyes constantly drawn back to the strange metallic shape in the sand. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag, the desert wind whispered over the dunes. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt as if the desert had a secret, one that it was willing to share, but only with him. The next morning, Daniel awoke before dawn, eager to continue his exploration. He approached the ship with a sense of reverence, noting how the first rays of sunlight made the surface shimmer in colors he couldn't name. The markings appeared even more intricate in the morning light, almost like they were alive, shifting with the angle of his gaze. He carefully traced the symbols with his fingers, documenting every detail in his notebook. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a growing connection, as if the ship itself was aware of him, waiting for him to speak. As the hours passed, he realized the enormity of his discovery. This was not just a wreck, it was a message, a mystery, and possibly a gift. He thought of all the scientists, historians, and explorers who might scoff at his claims, yet the proof was here, undeniable in its silent complexity. Daniel felt a mixture of pride, fear, and awe. He was standing at the edge of the unknown, and the desert around him had never seemed so alive. By midday, Daniel had begun to experiment with small, careful questions. He spoke aloud, asking if anyone, or anything, was inside. His voice echoed off the dunes, but the ship remained silent, or so he thought. The gentle hum he had noticed before seemed to intensify for a moment, a vibration under his hand that made his heart race. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Daniel felt it, a tiny acknowledgement, a response that filled him with wonder. He realized he would have to return again and again to uncover the truth. But one thing was certain, this was no ordinary day in the desert. Daniel Cruz had discovered something extraordinary, something that would change the course of his life forever. The desert, which had always seemed empty and silent, now felt like a living, breathing world full of secrets waiting for the right person to unlock them. And Daniel was ready. Daniel woke early the next morning, the cool desert air a welcome relief after the harsh sun of the day before. He quickly packed his small camp and moved toward the ship, his heart racing with anticipation. Last night's discoveries had left him restless, and he could hardly wait to explore further. As he approached, the metallic surface of the ship glimmered faintly under the pale light, almost as if it recognized his presence. He felt a strange sense of calm, mixed with excitement. The ship was no longer just an object to study. It felt like a being, silent but aware, waiting for him. He crouched beside the strange vessel, examining it with fresh eyes. Every curve and panel seemed more intricate in the morning light. Daniel noticed new details he hadn't seen before. Tiny grooves in the metal that formed complex geometric patterns, almost like circuits, and faint lines that looked like they could move or shift under pressure. He reached out, pressing a finger lightly against one of the panels. To his astonishment, a soft, barely audible click sounded. The panel vibrated not violently, but just enough to make him step back in surprise. Daniel's mind raced. Could the ship be functional? Could it respond to touch, or even to his presence? He swallowed hard and spoke aloud, his voice echoing in the stillness of the desert. "Hello, can you hear me?" At first, there was only silence. The wind whispered across the dunes, and Daniel feared that he had imagined the sensation of movement. But then a low hum began under his hand, subtle but unmistakable. It vibrated through his fingers and into his palm, almost like the heartbeat of a living creature. Daniel froze. His mouth went dry, and his mind struggled to process what he was feeling. He had studied technology, history, and even strange phenomena in books, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The hum grew slightly stronger as Daniel whispered again, this time asking, "Who are you? Where are you from?" The ship seemed to respond in kind. A faint light glowed along the edges of the panel he had touched, forming patterns that shifted slowly, almost as if trying to communicate. Daniel's eyes widened. He could not understand the patterns yet, but their presence suggested awareness, intelligence. For hours, Daniel spoke to the ship, slowly building a pattern of questions and observations. He asked about its origin, how it had ended up in the desert, and whether anyone, or anything, was inside. Each time, the ship responded with subtle vibrations and changing lights. Daniel recorded everything in his notebook, drawing the shifting patterns as best as he could. The more he spoke, the more the ship seemed to listen, and he began to feel a connection, as if the desert itself had granted him a rare privilege. By midday, the sun was high and the heat pressed down on him. Daniel took a break, leaning against the ship for shade. His mind was buzzing with possibilities. If the ship was intelligent, it could have knowledge far beyond what humans had discovered. Could it contain technology, history, or messages from a civilization he had never imagined? Daniel felt a shiver of excitement and fear. He realized that this was no ordinary discovery. This was extraordinary, possibly life-changing. As he rested, Daniel noticed other subtle changes. Small panels on the ship began to shift slightly, opening just a fraction of an inch before settling again. Tiny jets of warm air hissed from hidden vents, and the metallic surface seemed to shimmer in response to his voice. It was almost as if the ship was breathing, adapting to his presence. Daniel's curiosity turned into determination. He knew he needed to understand it, to communicate in a meaningful way, even if he had no idea how. Over the next several hours, Daniel experimented carefully. He spoke slowly, clearly, and deliberately, asking simple questions first. "Are you from far away?" he asked. "Do you have knowledge you want to share?" Each time, the ship responded with patterns of lights, vibrations, and subtle movements. Daniel began to realize that the ship was not just a passive object. It was an entity capable of interaction, and it had chosen him as its interlocutor. Daniel felt a mix of exhilaration and responsibility. He understood that this discovery could change not only his life, but the world's understanding of technology and intelligence. Yet, he also knew that exposure could be dangerous. News of the ship might attract unwanted attention, governments, scientists, or worse, people driven by greed. For now, the desert was a sanctuary, and he vowed to protect it until he could understand more. As afternoon turned to evening, Daniel became more daring. He spoke longer sentences, explaining who he was, why he had come, and what he hoped to learn. He asked about the ship's purpose, its creators, and its history. In response, the lights and vibrations grew more complex. It was as if the ship was thinking, analyzing, and choosing what to reveal. Daniel could feel the excitement building within him. Every response, no matter how subtle, reinforced the idea that he was on the brink of something remarkable. The desert sun sank toward the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the sand. Daniel continued his interaction, undeterred by the fading light. The ship's lights glowed more brightly now, illuminating the dunes around it with an otherworldly shimmer. Daniel marveled at the beauty of the moment, realizing that he was witnessing something no one else in the world had ever seen. The desert, which had always seemed empty, was now alive with the presence of the unknown. Night fell, and the temperature dropped sharply. Daniel wrapped himself in a blanket but remained close to the ship. He spoke softly, recounting stories from his life, his dreams, and even his fears. The ship responded with subtle pulses, a gentle rhythm that seemed almost comforting. For the first time, Daniel felt a connection that went beyond curiosity. It was a bond, fragile but undeniable, between a human and a being of unknown origin. Daniel knew he could not leave the ship yet. He camped nearby, keeping watch throughout the night. The desert was silent except for the occasional whisper of wind and the faint hum of the ship. Daniel marveled at the patience and intelligence it displayed. It did not rush, it did not demand, and yet it responded. He realized that he was learning not just about the ship, but about patience, communication, and the power of listening. Over the next several days, Daniel continued his interactions, slowly learning the patterns and rhythms of the ship's responses. He discovered that certain tones in his voice would trigger different lights, while gestures or touches could elicit vibrations. He experimented carefully, taking meticulous notes, and each small breakthrough filled him with awe. The desert, once a place of isolation, had become a laboratory, a classroom, and a sanctuary for discovery. During this time, Daniel also noticed subtle environmental changes. The desert wind seemed to carry messages, the dunes shifted in patterns that mirrored the ship's movements, and the night sky appeared more vivid, as if the stars themselves were watching. Daniel felt that he was part of a larger story, one that connected the desert, the ship, and the universe in ways he could not yet comprehend. As he grew more confident, Daniel began to ask deeper questions. "Why are you here?" he asked. "What do you want from me?" The ship responded with a soft, rhythmic vibration and a pattern of lights that danced along its surface. Daniel interpreted this as a sign of understanding, and he realized that the ship was not just sharing information. It was testing him, gauging his intentions, and building trust. By the end of the week, Daniel felt a profound shift in himself. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant in something extraordinary. The ship had become a companion, a teacher, and a mystery all at once. Every day brought new revelations, small yet significant, and Daniel knew that he was on the threshold of understanding something that could alter his perception of reality forever. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red and orange, Daniel spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. "I want to learn from you. I promise I will protect you. I will not let anyone harm you." The ship responded with a long, steady vibration that filled the air like a gentle pulse. Daniel felt a deep sense of reassurance, as if the ship had acknowledged his words and accepted him as a guardian. That night, Daniel slept under the stars, feeling more connected to the desert and the ship than ever before. He understood that the days ahead would bring challenges, questions, and possibly dangers, but he was ready. The discovery had changed him, igniting a spark of wonder, curiosity, and responsibility. He was no longer just a wanderer in the desert. He was a part of something far greater, a witness to a mystery that had waited for centuries to be found. By the time dawn broke again, Daniel was already awake, eager to continue his journey of discovery. The ship, silent yet alive, gleamed in the first light of morning, as if inviting him to speak, to learn, and to understand. Daniel smiled, feeling a mixture of awe and determination. He had found something extraordinary, and he knew that his life, and perhaps the world, would never be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's bond with the ship deepened. He spent almost every hour near it, speaking, observing, and carefully learning its patterns. What had begun as curiosity had grown into fascination, then into a sense of responsibility. The desert, once silent and empty, now felt alive, filled with the subtle rhythms of the ship. Its lights and vibrations had become familiar, almost comforting, yet Daniel knew there was still so much he didn't understand. Each morning, he awoke eager to continue. The ship seemed to wake with him, its panels glimmering faintly in the dawn light. Daniel discovered that certain words and tones would trigger new responses, small pulses that ran along its metallic surface. Over time, he learned to interpret them, though not perfectly, and he began asking more complex questions. He wanted to understand its origin, its purpose, and most of all, whether it had knowledge that could help humanity. One day, after weeks of careful experimentation, the ship responded in a way that surprised him. When Daniel asked about its creators, a series of lights formed patterns across the panels that he had never seen before. They pulsed and shifted, creating shapes that seemed almost like diagrams. Daniel sketched them quickly in his notebook, trying to capture every detail. He realized that this could be a form of communication far beyond anything humans had developed. It was deliberate, intelligent, and patient, and Daniel felt a mixture of excitement and reverence. The more he interacted with the ship, the more Daniel realized that it had knowledge about technology and energy far beyond what humans had discovered. He asked about sustainable energy sources, and the ship responded with vibrations and lights that seemed to map out ideas for machines and processes. He could not build them yet, but the concepts were clear in his mind. He began to understand that this discovery was not just a mystery, it was a potential gift to the world, a treasure of knowledge waiting to be used wisely. But the excitement came with fear. Daniel knew that sharing this discovery openly could be dangerous. Governments might want to control it, scientists might experiment without caution, and there could even be people who would try to take it by force. He realized that he had to protect the ship, not just for its own sake, but for the sake of the knowledge it held. He became vigilant, watching the desert carefully for any signs of intruders. Even the smallest footprint or distant vehicle sent a spike of tension through him. Despite these worries, Daniel's connection to the ship grew stronger. He spoke to it about his life, his dreams, and his hopes for the future. In response, the ship's vibrations and light patterns became more expressive, almost as if it were acknowledging his thoughts. He felt a profound sense of companionship, the kind that comes from understanding and trust. The ship was not human, but it seemed to recognize intention, kindness, and curiosity. Daniel knew he had been chosen to be its observer, its student, and its protector. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel asked a question he had hesitated to speak aloud. "Do you know about humans?" "About our history?" The ship's lights shifted in slow, deliberate patterns, and for the first time, Daniel felt as if it was sharing something more than data. The patterns suggested events, places, and even people he had never heard of. He realized that the ship had knowledge of the world far beyond what humans recorded. It had witnessed things, perhaps even from other civilizations, that had been forgotten over time. The revelation filled Daniel with awe and unease. The ship's knowledge could change everything, how humans understood history, science, and even their place in the universe. He imagined the possibilities and the dangers. Knowledge, if misused, could bring destruction as easily as progress. He knew he had to be careful to protect the ship and its secrets until he understood them fully. As the days passed, Daniel noticed subtle changes in his own thinking. He began to see connections in the world that he had never noticed before. Patterns in nature, shifts in the desert winds, and even human behavior seemed to make more sense in light of the ship's silent lessons. It was as if the ship had not only knowledge but wisdom, teaching him to observe, to question, and to think beyond the ordinary. He felt both humbled and empowered, aware that he had been given a responsibility far greater than himself. However, the solitude of the desert also brought challenges. Daniel felt the weight of secrecy pressing on him. He could not share his discovery with anyone, not even his closest friends. The burden was heavy, and some nights he wondered if he had made the right choice. But when he returned to the ship, its quiet presence reassured him. The gentle hum, the shifting lights, and the faint warmth of its metal reminded him why he had committed himself to this path. He was not alone, and the ship's trust in him demanded care and patience. One morning, while examining a new set of panels, Daniel noticed faint signs of intrusion. Small footprints led toward the ship, disturbed sand suggesting someone had passed nearby. Panic surged through him, but he quickly calmed himself, knowing he had to be smart, not reckless. He checked the area carefully and saw no one in sight. The desert was vast, and whoever had been there could be miles away by now. Yet the incident made him realize the vulnerability of his discovery. He needed a plan to protect the ship. Daniel spent the next few days devising ways to camouflage and secure the ship. He used natural materials, building small barriers and subtle dunes to hide its location. He also set up careful observation points, using mirrors and binoculars to watch for anyone approaching. The task was exhausting, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Protecting the ship was no longer just about curiosity, it was about responsibility. Even as he dealt with these challenges, Daniel continued to communicate with the ship. He asked about energy, movement, and even life itself. The responses were complex but fascinating. The ship seemed capable of teaching, not in words, but in patterns and vibrations that challenged his mind to think differently. He spent hours each day trying to interpret its signals, often drawing diagrams and notes in a worn notebook. Each discovery, no matter how small, felt monumental. The more he learned, the more Daniel realized that this ship could change humanity's understanding of science and life. It was not simply a relic or a machine. It was a bridge to knowledge that had been lost or never discovered. And yet, the responsibility weighed heavily. He knew that sharing too soon or with the wrong people could destroy everything. He had to wait, to learn, and to understand fully before revealing even a fraction of what he had discovered. One night, as the stars glittered above the desert, Daniel spoke to the ship quietly. "I will protect you. I will learn from you. I will not let anyone harm you." The ship responded with a slow, steady pulse, almost like a heartbeat, and for the first time, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of connection. He realized that the bond was mutual. The ship trusted him as much as he trusted it. The desert, the night sky, and the vast silence all seemed to confirm this understanding. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued his careful studies. He experimented with patterns of speech, tone, and gesture, slowly building a language of interaction. The ship responded with increasing clarity, revealing concepts about energy, history, and movement. Daniel could not yet fully grasp everything, but each day brought new understanding. It was as if the ship were teaching him not just facts, but a way of thinking, an approach to knowledge that was patient, careful, and profound. Yet Daniel could not ignore the outside world. Occasionally, distant vehicles or unusual lights in the desert reminded him that others might someday discover the ship. He grew vigilant, tracking changes in the environment and planning contingencies. Protecting the ship became a balance of curiosity and caution. He knew that the knowledge it held was too valuable to risk in the wrong hands, yet he could not abandon it either. Through all of this, Daniel began to feel a transformation within himself. He was more patient, more observant, and more thoughtful. He had learned to trust his instincts, to read subtle signs, and to think deeply about consequences. The ship had become more than a discovery. It had become a teacher, a companion, and a mirror reflecting what humanity could achieve if curiosity was balanced with care. As the desert days stretched on, Daniel realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer simply an explorer. He was a guardian of knowledge, a student of something extraordinary. The ship had given him a glimpse of the unimaginable, and in return, he offered his protection, patience, and dedication. Together, they formed a silent partnership, waiting for the right moment to reveal their lessons to the world, if that moment ever came. Daniel looked out across the endless dunes, the ship glowing softly beside him. He felt a mix of awe, responsibility, and determination. He knew that challenges would come, people curious, greedy, or careless, but he also knew that he had been chosen to safeguard this incredible discovery. The desert, once a place of isolation, had become a place of learning, growth, and wonder. And Daniel, forever changed by his connection with the ship, understood that his journey was only beginning. Days had passed since Daniel had begun noticing unusual footprints near the ship, and the tension in his mind had grown. He knew the desert was vast, but he also understood that someone might eventually stumble upon this extraordinary discovery. The responsibility weighed on him more heavily than ever. Every morning he approached the ship with the same awe and care, yet now a new sense of urgency accompanied his curiosity. The knowledge it contained was not just remarkable, it was fragile and vulnerable, like a delicate treasure waiting to be protected. He spent the early hours of the day reviewing his notes, sketches, and observations. The ship's light patterns and vibrations had become almost like a language, one that he could interpret with growing confidence. He had learned not just to ask questions, but to listen. The ship seemed to teach through subtlety, giving him information slowly, requiring patience, focus, and respect. Some of the designs it shared were unlike anything humans had ever created, machines powered without fuel, ways of harnessing energy from sunlight, wind, and even sound. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. If used wisely, this knowledge could transform the world. But if misused, it could be dangerous. As the afternoon sun rose higher, Daniel made a decision. He could not leave the ship unprotected, nor could he allow anyone to stumble upon it accidentally. He began creating a plan to hide it more effectively. Using the natural contours of the desert, he carefully built small dunes and trenches around the ship, making it blend almost seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. He positioned rocks and shrubs to obscure it further, all while maintaining access for himself. It was hard, exhausting work, but every sweep of sand and placement of stone felt necessary, almost sacred. While he worked, Daniel continued to communicate with the ship. He asked questions about movement, energy, and even life itself. The ship responded with patterns and pulses that slowly became clearer to him. It seemed to understand that Daniel was preparing for a potential threat, and its vibrations were steady, reassuring, almost as if it trusted him to make the right choices. Daniel felt a deep sense of responsibility. He was not merely an observer or explorer. He was a guardian, chosen for this moment, and he could not fail. Evenings were his favorite time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky transformed into shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting off the ship's metallic surface. Daniel spoke softly, recounting stories from his childhood, his dreams, and even his fears. The ship responded with gentle pulses of light, as if listening, acknowledging, and comforting. He realized that this bond was unique, unlike any human friendship he had ever experienced. It was quiet, patient, and profound. The ship had chosen him as its companion, and he had chosen to protect it in return. One night, while the stars shone brightly above, Daniel noticed distant headlights approaching across the dunes. His heart pounded. He crouched behind a small ridge, watching silently as a vehicle drew closer. It could be a tourist, a scientist, or someone who had heard rumors about unusual activity in the desert. Whatever the case, Daniel knew he had to act carefully. He could not confront them directly. He needed a plan that would protect the ship without exposing it. For the next hour, he watched the vehicle circle the area, stopping occasionally. The occupants seemed curious, but they were cautious, moving slowly and carefully. Daniel held his breath, imagining the consequences if they discovered the ship. Any interference could be catastrophic, not only for the discovery but for the knowledge it contained. He whispered to himself, reminding himself to stay calm, to stay focused, and to protect the ship at all costs. Finally, the vehicle moved away, and Daniel exhaled a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The desert returned to silence, and the ship's gentle hum was the only sound around him. He approached the ship cautiously, checking for any damage or signs of intrusion. Nothing had changed. The ship seemed as calm as ever, its lights glowing softly in the starlight. Daniel knelt beside it, feeling a deep sense of relief and renewed determination. He would not let anyone harm this remarkable discovery. Over the next few days, Daniel strengthened his defenses around the ship and refined his methods of communication. He asked increasingly complex questions about energy systems, history, and even the universe itself. The ship responded with patterns that revealed insights beyond his imagination. Some designs seemed impossible, yet the logic behind them was flawless. Daniel realized he was learning not just information, but a new way of thinking, how to approach problems with patience, creativity, and precision. As he continued, Daniel also faced personal challenges. The isolation of the desert was growing heavier, and the weight of secrecy pressed on him. He longed to share this discovery with someone, yet he knew he could not. The responsibility of guarding the ship was entirely his. Some nights he felt the loneliness acutely, staring at the vast desert and the endless stars. But each time he returned to the ship, its steady hum and gentle light reassured him. The bond they shared was stronger than any fear or doubt he felt. One afternoon, as a sandstorm began to rise in the distance, Daniel realized he had to make a critical decision. The storm could bury the ship, damage its surface, or even make it impossible for him to reach it. He raced across the dunes, carefully shielding the ship with his makeshift barriers, working quickly and methodically to protect it. Hours passed in exhausting labor, but by nightfall the ship was secure. Daniel collapsed beside it, exhausted but satisfied. He realized that this discovery was not just about learning, it was about stewardship, patience, and courage. During the quiet nights after the storm, Daniel reflected on how much he had changed. The ship had taught him lessons about responsibility, trust, and understanding. He was no longer the same person who had wandered into the desert weeks ago. He had become patient, careful, and deeply aware of the delicate balance between knowledge and power. Every moment spent with the ship felt sacred, and he knew that his life's purpose had shifted. Protecting it was now central to his existence. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A small group of researchers appeared on the horizon, moving in a way that suggested they were searching for something unusual. Daniel's heart sank. He knew he had to act, but confrontation could risk revealing the ship. He observed them carefully, noting their movements and behavior. They did not seem malicious, but they were determined. Daniel realized that he could not rely on luck alone. He had to protect the ship through careful planning and stealth. He spent the day preparing. Using sand, rocks, and subtle camouflage, he ensured that the ship blended seamlessly into the desert. He created decoy pathways and visual distractions, leading anyone who approached away from the actual location. By evening, he was confident that the ship was safe. He returned to its side, feeling the familiar warmth of its metal and the reassuring pulse of its lights. The bond they shared gave him strength. He knew that he could face challenges and protect this extraordinary discovery. During these days, Daniel also learned more about the ship's purpose. It seemed to have been designed to observe, record, and preserve knowledge. Some of the information it shared hinted at civilizations far older than humanity, technologies that could revolutionize energy and transportation, and ways of thinking that emphasized harmony with the world rather than dominance over it. Daniel felt privileged to witness this knowledge, and he understood that it had to be handled responsibly. By the end of the week, Daniel had grown more confident in his role as guardian. He had created safe zones, learned the ship's rhythms, and interpreted its messages with growing clarity. Yet, he also understood that the world outside the desert remained unpredictable. He would need to remain vigilant, patient, and wise. The ship had chosen him for a reason, and he intended to honor that trust. One quiet night, under a sky filled with countless stars, Daniel whispered to the ship, "I will protect you always. I will learn from you, and I will share your lessons only when the world is ready." The ship responded with a steady, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat, and Daniel felt a profound sense of connection. It was more than an object now. It was a partner, a teacher, and a companion. He realized that some mysteries were not meant to be revealed hastily. They were meant to be understood fully and respected. In the following days, Daniel continued his careful studies, recording new patterns and insights. He experimented with subtle movements, sounds, and gestures, gradually building a complex understanding of the ship's communication system. The more he learned, the more he realized that the ship's knowledge was not static. It adapted, evolved, and responded to his curiosity. Daniel felt privileged and honored to be part of this extraordinary relationship. Finally, Daniel knew it was time to make a long-term decision. He could not remain in the desert indefinitely, yet leaving the ship unprotected was not an option. After careful thought, he devised a plan to conceal the ship in a hidden cavern nearby, using natural formations to keep it safe while maintaining access for study. He worked tirelessly over several days, moving sand, rocks, and debris to create a secure shelter. When the task was complete, the ship rested hidden from view, yet still accessible to Daniel. As he stood beside the hidden ship, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had come seeking curiosity and adventure, and he had found something extraordinary: knowledge, companionship, and a sense of purpose. The ship had changed him, teaching him patience, responsibility, and the value of careful observation. He knew that the world would never fully understand what he had discovered, but he also understood that some secrets were meant to be protected until the right moment. Looking out over the desert, the endless dunes shimmering in the morning sun, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced fear, solitude, and uncertainty, yet he had remained steadfast. The ship, a silent yet intelligent companion, had guided him, challenged him, and transformed him. Together, they had built a bond that transcended the ordinary, a partnership of trust and understanding. Daniel knew that life would continue, that the world outside the desert would go on with its challenges and discoveries. Yet, he also knew that he carried a responsibility unlike any other. He was the guardian of knowledge, the keeper of secrets, and a student of something extraordinary. The ship had chosen him, and he had accepted that role with courage, patience, and reverence. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the desert, Daniel smiled. The journey was far from over, but he was ready. He had discovered something incredible, and he had protected it. The desert, the ship, and the endless sky above had become a part of him, just as he had become a part of their story. And in that moment, Daniel understood that some discoveries are not measured in fame, fortune, or recognition. They are measured in understanding, responsibility, and the courage to protect what is precious.